Okay, last one you found difficult was question 7 here. So it comes up with all this information. So if you found this one really difficult, when you're studying any topic, try and find the questions that are really wordsy, okay? So the problem with this was that it was just so wordsy. So it said, so I'm going to get my highlighter out, and it says, a potato farmer is trying various types of fertilizers on his crops to determine, okay, so that's all, just doesn't matter. During the 2019 growing season, okay, well, it's nothing to do with years, so that doesn't matter. He found that the yield produced was related to the amount of super spud fertilizer used per acre in tons. The yield produced could be modelled using the function below, where y represents the yield, okay, so that's what I want to know, that y represents the yield, and x represents the number of 50 kilograms fertilizer. Okay, x represents the number of 50 kilogram bags of fertilizer. Okay, so it says, how many tons of potatoes will be produced if the farmer decides to use no fertilizer on his crop? So if he uses no fertilizer, that means he uses no 50 kilogram bags of fertilizer, so x is going to be 0. Okay, so x there is equal to 0. Okay, so I'm going to use this equation. Okay, I am looking for how many tons of potatoes. So yield means the amount of potatoes, the amount of tons of potatoes. Okay, so here, greatest yield in tons. Oops. Okay, so I am looking for y when x equals 0. So I'm going to fill into my equation anywhere that there was an x. I am going to fill in that is now going to be my amount of fertilizer, 0. Okay, so anything multiplied by 0 is 0. So this is going to turn to 11 plus 0 plus 0, which means I get 11. Okay, so how many tons of potatoes will be produced? 11 tons. Okay. Okay, then the next part says calculate the increase in his yield in tons if he uses 1.5 bags of fertilizer per acre. Okay, so this 1.5 bags of fertilizer means that 1.5 bags is what x is. X is now going to be 1.5. Okay, so I am just going to figure out what is his yield, what is y, when x is 1.5. So I'm going to have 11 plus 10.7 times x, so times 1.5. Okay, so I'm just filling in this anytime that there was an x, like I done up here. And then I'm going to add, it's a minus. So make sure you take down the function properly. So minus 4.8 times my x value squared, so times the 1.5 squared. Okay, so I'm going to fill all this in. I can either write it into my calculator there, or I can go down through it in steps. Okay, so I'm going to go through this in the steps through BIMDAS. So inside my brackets, there's nothing that I can simplify. I do have indices. I have a squared here, so I'm going to do that squared first. Okay, so I still have my 11 plus 10.7 times 1.5 minus 4.8, and now 1.5 squared is going to give me, so that's 3 over 2, so 9 over 4. Okay, so now I'm going to do out from BIMDAS. Well, I don't have brackets to simplify, I don't have indices anymore. I do have multiplication, so I'm going to do out my multiplications now. So I'll have 11 plus 10.7 times 1.5 is 16.05. And then minus 4.8 by 9 over 4 is going to give me 10.8. Oops, sorry. That's my dog. 10.8. Okay, so I'm just going to type that into my calculator, and I get 16.25. Yeah. Okay. So now I go back to my question. I reread it. Have I fully answered it? Okay, so I've mentioned the 1.5 bags. I know how many tons you get, but it calculates the increase in yield. So I'm now getting 16.25 tons, whereas before I was having 11 tons. So here I'm going to say, so what's my increase? So 16.25 minus the 11, and he has an increase of 5.25 tons. Okay? And then next page says, how many bags of fertilizer per acre would he use to maximize the yield? So maximize, straight away we go to what we think of when we see max and min. Okay, we go to differentiation. Okay, so we need to differentiate. We need to differentiate the equation we had. So we had that y was equal to 11 plus 10.7x minus 4.8x squared. Okay, so we want to differentiate this. So we are going to look for dy dx. Okay, so 11 is going to go to 0 because there's no x's there. 10.7x is going to be just 10.7. And then, so remember what we're doing here is we're multiplying by the power. So that one had a power of 1 and then reducing the power by 1. So I would have an x to the power of 0, which we don't write down. And then here, minus 4.8 multiplied by the power in the x. So that's going to give me, so 4.8 times 2 is 9.6. And we reduce the power by 1, so it's just going to be x. Okay, and then it says, so how many bags of fertilizer per acre would you use to maximize the yield? So what we're looking for here is, if I have a graph like this, what is that max point there? Okay, so we are looking for the max of a graph. So I'm going to let this equal to 0. So this is the slope at any point. I want to figure out where the slope is 0. So if I have a graph like this, the slope is going to be 0 at that maximum point. Okay, so I'm going to let this equal to 0 to find the maximum point. So 10.7 minus 9.6x is equal to 0. So that means, so I want x to be on one side by itself. So I'm going to minus 9.6x from both sides. So I'm going to move my x's over to the right side. Now, if you had left them on the left side, you'll still get the exact same answer if you move the 10.7 instead. So I have 10.7 now is equal to, sorry, I should have added that to both sides. So it's equal to 9.6x. Okay, now I don't want what 9.6x is. I want what x is. So I'm going to divide by 9.6 on both sides, and then I will get that 1.114583. 1.114583 is equal to x. Okay, so that's how many bags of fertilizer maximize the yield. Now it says give your answer correct to one decimal place, so I'm just going to give it as 1.1 is equal to x. Okay, so 1.1 bag of fertilizer per acre. And then it says how many tons of potatoes are grown at this maximum yield. Give your answer correct to the nearest ton. So we are literally going to have to fill in for x this 1.1 back into that equation. So x equals 1.1, and we have my equation here for y. So y is now going to be equal to 11 plus 10.7 times this x value, so my 1.1, and then minus 4.8 x squared, so 1.1 squared. Okay, so when I go to fill this in, so I'm going to get y is equal to 11 plus, again, I'll do out my, I'll just do out, so 10.7 times 1.1, I'll get 11.77. And then minus 4.8 by 1.1 squared is going to give me 5.808. Okay, so my amount of potatoes that are grown is going to be 16.962. So it says to the nearest ton, so it's 17 tons. Okay. Now, it says complete the following table given your answer to one decimal place. So you need to fill in the function of what y is equal to. So up here, y is equal to 11 plus 10.7x minus 4.8x squared, and all these different x values to fill in this table. So you guys can do that into your calculators. Okay, so when you do out that table, like, I'm not going to do out that graph, or I'm not going to do out a table with all these workings out in it, because you guys can type this into your calculator. Okay, you lost marks if you didn't give your answer correct to one decimal place. You lost, I actually just didn't give you the mark. Okay, so if you didn't write it to one decimal place, you didn't get the mark for getting that answer right. So in here, you should have gotten that, well, we had already calculated it out for 0, it was 11. And then we calculated it out as well for 1.5, and we had gotten 16.3 or 16.25, but 16.3 when we rounded to one decimal place. Okay, and then the other ones we need to have filtered into our calculator or done out the table to get them. Okay, in the graph that you do here, you need to do it in a straight curve. Okay, so your graph looks something like that, okay, but not exactly like that, because that wouldn't match up with the exact points. But if you had done like a connect the dots like this, whatever it was, okay, straight away, even if you got every single point right, you were getting 15 out of 20 marks. Okay, so don't do it like that.